Sophie & Co. I'm Sophie Shevardnadze. Vladimir Putin has won the Russian vote, is about to embark on a second consecutive term as Russia's president. What lies ahead for Russia and the world now? I ask his official spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov. Thanks a lot for being on our program. It's been a while, actually.
Yeah.
So I guess Putin has to win more often for us to talk to you. But we got a lot to talk about. Let's start with elections. Elections are over. President Putin got much more than anyone expected. He got more than in 2012.
It's a historical record, of our country.
Yeah, but, everyone thought he was going to win. Even the people who didn't like him were like, of course he's going to win. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But the bets were 60, 65%. But this, did you expect this result?
No. And himself, he said actually that it was quite unexpected for him. It was quite unexpected. And now, of course, as a president of a country, when you have this level of support, you feel the level of responsibility. Because every leader carries a burden of responsibility of this support.
I was in America recently, in Europe. What they're saying is that because there's so much pressure from the West towards Russia, that kind of helped consolidate Russia's public opinion and helped Putin gain this much votes. Would you agree with that?
Well, partly yes, of course. We can hardly ignore this effect of international pressure coming from outside, because this is Russia. It's an outstanding country with its own traditions, historical traditions, and historical mood of people. If they face any pressure coming from outside, they unite. They unite, and they unite around a strong leader. This happened numerous times during our history, and of course, partly it is happening now. Because when you see unprecedented pressure, when you see even craziness coming from some countries, you understand what I mean. People cannot tolerate it. They resist. And resisting, they unite around a strong leader.
The Russian constitution limits the president to 2 consecutive terms. Now, when Putin was asked about what he's going to do, he said, I'm not going to change the constitution yet. Yet being the key word.
Well, actually, he never said that.
He never said that?
Well, of course. You have to be very precise when you quote Putin.
What was his exact quote?
Otherwise, he will say that you are like myself.
Did you take that seriously? I mean, seriously, he said that...
No, he said the question was, have you ever thought and are you planning constitutional reform in this country? Constitutional reform.
Not yet.
And he said, not yet, but it's not about changing constitution, or it's constitutional reform is more complicated thing.
But he said not yet.
And you have to be precise in quoting that. So, he never did it before. He never did it in the year of 2008. And he was enjoying, again, overwhelming support of the people of this country. And presumably, should he wanted that in the year of 2008, he could have easily done that, to change the constitution and to adjust the constitution in accordance with his own political perspectives. He never did that. And we don't have any slightest reason not to believe him, not to trust him, not to think that he is not going to adjust constitution in accordance with his personal political will. The only thing that he's pursuing, the only goal, is a goal of ensuring a prosperity, rising prosperity of the people of this country, stability of this country, and economical breakthrough of this country.
Okay, so just to precise, when he meant no constitutional reform yet, he meant that maybe there will be constitutional reform, but it wouldn't be tied to his personal staying or not staying in power. Is that what you're saying?
Well, of course.
Okay.
Of course.
All right. I know that after elections, you're like, president, this term is going to be focusing on internal affairs, he's going to be focusing on everything that's going on in the economy. What would that mean for the foreign policy? Would that isolate Russia either further from the rest of the world?
No, to the contrary. To the contrary, Russia and President Putin is looking for repairing relationship where it is possible, and looking for developing and furthering relationship with the various countries, especially our partners in Europe, with the United States, and proceeding in these development as far as our partners are ready to. Well, the foreign policy, as far as I can interpret it, in Putin's understanding, the main purpose of foreign policy and international relations is to ensure a comfortable environment for implementing of domestic tasks. So he is quite understandable in his domestic tasks. He's got quite a clear plan of development and understanding of preliminary tasks, of secondary tasks, and so on and so forth. So what he needs a support from diplomacy to ensure a comfortable environment for them.
We got a lot of questions about whether there is a room for maneuvering between West and Russia and whether there is place for creative diplomacy. But first, I want to ask you about us and what we do and the consequences that what we do entails in the West. For instance, when the president was addressing the nation, he unveiled new weapons to the world and said that no one has this kind of weapons. These are the best, the fastest. And he said, now the world will listen. Do we need to show weapons in order for the world to listen to us? I mean, do we not have other means to get our message across?
Well, he's been trying to send his message across since the year of 2002 or 2003. I don't remember exactly right now. But when United States abandoned the Treaty of Anti-Missile Defense, that was a very, very serious threat for mutual nuclear deterrence. And this is a basic element of international stability and security. And since then, Russia found itself as a state being under siege of attempts of neutralizing its nuclear potential, its nuclear capabilities, thus endangering the existence of nuclear deterrence. The only way, and despite sending signals of unacceptance of this process, proposing various compromises, proposing cooperation in ensuring international stability, unfortunately, our country failed to meet reciprocity. And as a result, the only way was to show that in any case, despite all the efforts of our counterparts in this story, despite their continuous efforts to build the entire missile shield, Russia will be capable of ensuring a mutual deterrence system.
Do you feel like this is working? Showing that we have the best weapons in the world? Yes?
Definitely yes.
Can you elaborate?
Well, if you analyze the reaction coming from responsible members of international society, you will see that there is a certain understanding of necessity of urgent negotiations on international security and even disarmament.
Well, Trump just complained recently after a phone call to Moscow that this arms race is getting out of hand. Out of whose hands?
Well, we know that nuclear weapons are made not to be used. They are made to protect. And the main purpose of existence of nuclear weapons is not to be used ever. So they protect and they ensure stability and they ensure this balance. But we're not only two countries carrying nuclear weapons, nuclear potential. There are other countries, countries that are about to become nuclear powers, or countries who are endangering the world to become nuclear powers, countries that might have become already nuclear powers. We all know that. And all these can lead to change of balance, and that is extremely dangerous, and that needs cooperation between leading nuclear powers to ensure a process of non-proliferation, to cooperate in strategic stability.
But I think when he meant the arms race is getting out of hand, he really just meant Russia and the United States. And you know, I was asked this question when I was in America, and I thought it was kind of funny because there's such a discrepancy in Russia's military budget and America's military budget. I mean, there were like $700 billion budget with like 80 billion just bonus this year, and all of our budget is 80 billion.
And then it is going to be reduced.
Yeah, so how,
it's
I mean, how can anyone really talk about arms race seriously?
Well, of course, we cannot compare our military expenditures. So in 5 years we're going to spend less than 3% of GDP for military defense purposes and for arms production purposes. It cannot be compared with the expenditures of the United States. But I would like to remind you of the latest statements of President Putin. Russia is not going to be driven into an arms race. It does not correspond with President Putin's primarily goal of domestic economic development and domestic breakthrough in economy. So we all, and President Putin, we all do not need arms race, and it was confirmed and declared by President Putin, and this is the main declaration that we have to take into account.
All right, Mr. Peskov, we're going to take a short break right now. When we come back, we're going to continue talking to Dmitry Peskov, Russian president's press secretary. We're talking about everything, relations between Russia, the United States, and Europe. We're talking about the media wars and much more. Stay with us. And we're back with Dmitry Peskov, Russian president's press secretary. Mr. Peskov, when NBC's Megyn Kelly asked him about whether we're in a new Cold War or not, President Putin dismissed it as propaganda. He said, no, anyone who's saying that America and Russia are at the new Cold War, that's part of propaganda. But when you really look at the facts, right, I mean, there are troops on Russia's borders, and they're getting closer and closer. Russia is creating new weapons. There's the huge media war going on between the countries. Accusations flying back and forth, especially towards Russia with the poisoning and the meddling in the elections. What is it, then, if not a Cold War? What is it that, well, what's happening between America and Russia right now?
We're witnessing lots of elements of Cold War. And unfortunately, we're seeing more and more of elements of Cold War in our agenda, and we're facing it in international relationship. We face, well, let me say it's not all the countries are comfortable with rising Russia. With rising Russia with the leadership of President Putin.
But they should be used to it by now. It's been 18 years, no?
Well, the more Russia is rising, the more uncomfortable they feel, and the more tough they start to behave in international relations. And in this tough behavior, they are ready to jeopardize international law, the basics of international relations, free trade and commerce regime. They are ready to forget about fair trade. They're ready to forget about WTO rules. They're ready to forget about every rules when they want to suppress Russia.
But why?
And these famous words of craziness, we're going to make them pay the price. You know, it's like maniacs.
But why
should
Russia? Why Russia?
Yeah.
I mean, there's China. I mean, it's rising much faster and much more. It's incomparable. There's no comparison to Russia, how fast China is rising. I mean, India much less, but still there's so many other countries that are rising. Whether we talk about human rights, what they accuse us of, I mean, incomparable what happens in Russia in those countries, right? Incomparable. But it's the Russia that's demonized. In terms of even rising, they're rising much faster than Russia. Why is it that the Russia is always the infernal enemy?
Well, I don't think I can explain it in a couple of words. It's a very complicated issue that needs a much more deeper analysis. I think it comes from history. If you see through history, Russia was treated as a rival, as an enemy, for lots of centuries. And then,
so it's just laziness and
there are some let's say, some remainings in attitude of Western countries towards Russia coming from that time. But it doesn't mean that all the countries in the West, that they share this philosophy. Lots of countries in Europe, they understand that Russia is an untakeable part of Europe, and you cannot think about prosperous Europe and developing Europe if you don't see Russia being involved in all the European processes, that Russia's voice has to be taken into account, and so on and so forth. So it's we cannot say that this angry attitude is an overwhelming one. It is very serious, unfortunately, but there are some voices, let's say sober voices, coming from various regions of the world.
I think this angry voice is overwhelming if we talk about United States. I mean, I lived in a country for 10 years. I love the country, but I have never, ever encountered and seen anything like that. This anti-Russian hysteria.
Well, you know the perfectness of the brainwashing system.
I want to talk to you about that because I feel like the main difference between the Cold War now, even though Putin doesn't like this as a term to describe what's going on now, and the Cold War then, the actual Cold War, is the media war. Because now we have the media on both sides. And to be fair, I think we should take fair share of the blame here. Because what you have is that everything is out in the open. Back then, there were rules of the game, like some boundaries that either side rarely crossed. Right now, with the media, putting it out everything there is, what presidents think or say, what journalists think or say, what a citizen, every average citizen thinks or says, that really makes it and takes the animosity to a whole new level. It takes it to the people's level, which was never there before. I mean, Soviet Union and America, they were ideological enemies, but the people never hated each other. They hated each other's systems, right? Soviets longed for all things Western and vice versa. Right now, what we have is this hatred on people's level, and I think the media is to blame for that. Do you feel like this media war, this unfiltered media war, is really adding to this animosity between the two countries?
Extremely. Well, people are naked against these media wars. They are victims. They fell victims of these media wars, and then they cannot create their own point of view. They cannot be an owner of their own attitude. So they are being even not motivated, but they're being driven into a certain wave of emotions without even understanding that. And they simply cannot have any objective approach towards this or that event, towards this or that country. There's a huge machine working. Actually, what happened during, let's say, last 3 or 4 decades, Anglo-Saxon media, they started to rule the world. Economically, commercial media, and also political media. I mean media from the United States and Great Britain. They are most powerful, they are most influential, and they have the widest possible reach in the world, globally. And of course, this feeling of monopoly So it brings a will to manipulate this monopoly. So you can use this monopoly as a tool of delivering your point of view, whether it is right or wrong, it doesn't matter. You can adjust it in accordance with the situation, simply to manipulate the brains of people throughout the world. And this is why they strongly oppose appearance of any rivals, even small rivals like RT, in comparison with this huge machine.
Small rivals.
Well, of course.
I would say we've done pretty well for the past 10 years.
I sincerely believe that size doesn't matter here. You can be small, but you can do much, let's say, more influential things. That is what you are doing, and that is what makes them very nervous.
Because we're just mirroring them. It's our response to them.
You are pretending to be a rival for them, and this rivalry can ruin the system of brainwash. This is the reality.
Do you feel like this media war should, be put down a notch a little bit? Maybe,
of course.
Maybe someone should say from the top, you guys, take it easy. It's getting out of hand.
I would like to remind you that Russian side, through diplomatic channels, through various channels, have proposed contacts with different partners in the world, in Western Europe and the United States, to cooperate in cyber terror, against cyber terror, to cooperate in joint combating informational fakes, and so on and so forth. No answer. Silence in answer. So no one would cooperate on that issue. And as a result, we see all of a sudden willingness of Anglo-Saxon media to enjoy the details of disaster, the disaster happening in Aleppo, and paying no attention to disaster happening in Raqqa, for example. So when it comes to actions of coalition, to coalition planes and coalition bombing, hundreds, tens of thousands of dead people and dead bodies lying there unburied, they don't pay any attention. You wouldn't find any trace of information on that.
Or about Yemen.
Yes, in Anglo-Saxon media. Why? Because the purpose is different. The purpose is not to be objective. This is it.
Whatever happened to the culture of dispute? Because I know Ronald Reagan, he hated Soviet Union. He never made it a secret that he wanted to break it up. But he went through the trouble to learn all the Soviet jokes so he controlled the Soviets accordingly. Now what you get, like this rhetoric back and forth, it's just so desolating. I mean, the latest coming from the British defense minister, just go away and shut up. What happened to
Britain is a different story,
But still, in general, what happened to this culture of dispute?
It is getting lower and lower, unfortunately. What we see is a country of Byron and Shakespeare, a country of Conan Doyle, a country that used to be a brilliant empire with immense political traditions of diplomacy, and so on and so forth. It turned into a country where politicians are making, well, let me humbly say, irresponsible statements. This is a problem. It's a reflection of a very hostile policy, unpredictably hostile policy, and this is the reality that we have to face. And this is the reality that we have to face. We have to minimize the consequences of this unfortunate reality for our country, and we have to ensure, using all possible diplomatic and political methods, we have to minimize the consequences for our own country and to ensure that conditions for our domestic purposes is suitable and comfortable.
Mr. Peskov, we're going to talk about that and much more in the second half of our program. We'll talk about whether US-Russia relations can get better and if Putin's jokes and the things that he says are lost in translation when it comes to Western media. Welcome to Sophie & Co. I'm Sophie Shevardnadze. We're talking today to Russian President Vladimir Putin's press secretary Dmitry Peskov. We're talking to him about what this presidency will mean for Russia and the world. So I got to ask you about the spy scandal in Great Britain. There are three conspiracy theories, the most popular ones. First one being that Putin ordered the killing of the spy to get some tough guy points before the elections. The second one is that it's the secret services who did it without Putin knowing. Forget about the third one. These two are the most popular one. I don't even know which one is worse.
And by the way, what's the third one?
It's something in between. But,
in between, okay.
Yeah. But those are the two most popular ones, that he ordered to get some tough guy points before the election. Well, the third one was he ordered it to actually provoke the West's reaction, and he knew that the West's reaction would be very hostile towards Russia, and they would further consolidate Russian voters around Putin. And the third one, which I think is the worst one, is that Putin didn't know, but his secret services just went along and executed.
This is artificially constructed theories. First, we have to remember, and the starting point is the words of President Putin that Russia has nothing to do with this accident. This is number one. Number two, we're not speaking about attempt to murder a Russian spy in Great Britain. We're speaking about attempt to murder a British spy in Great Britain. He was a British spy, and he is a British spy. He's not a Russian spy.
Well, his daughter is a Russian citizen.
Well, he's a Russian citizen, but he's not a Russian spy. He was handed in to Britain as a result of exchange. So why should Russia hand in a man that is of any importance or that is of any value? It's unimaginable. So if he's handed in, so Russia quits with him. He's of zero value, of zero importance. Go ahead. So this is number one. Number two, words of President Putin. So we're not as crazy as to even to think about something of that kind before presidential elections. And before such important event, global event as football championship. Number three, the first blamings came from politicians just a couple of hours after the accident. Couple of hours after the accident, we heard first blaming of Russia. That highly likely Russia was responsible of that murder, of attempt of murder. And now what we see words of experts and experts of organization for OPCW that say that the preliminary examining of this agent will take about 3 weeks. Is it contradictory? Yes, it is. Then, well, in general, why Russia? Why Russia? Why to blame Russia? You know, maybe it's a very rude comparison, especially in this situation. I don't think that anything can be ruder than reality. But nonetheless, just imagine Moscow City, car accident. There is a victim of the car accident, and we see what was the car, and the car was a British-made car. Let's say Range Rover. And just imagine that myself or foreign ministry spokeswoman makes a statement that the man was killed by a British-made car in a car accident in center of Moscow, and highly likely Prime Minister of Great Britain may be responsible of that murder.
Yeah, but I mean, no. The point is that it is crazy, but like it's much easier to smuggle a British-made car into another country than a Russian-made bomb to another one. I mean.
Oh, but why do you think that it could have been a Russian-made bomb or Russian-made agent?
You're saying we don't have any proofs.
Well, Russia has completed destroying of all chemical arsenal of chemical weapons, and it was confirmed by international observers.
What is your version? What happened? Is it an orchestrated thing?
We want to have a version, and we want to have a version as a result of Russia's taking part in this investigation. At least receiving some data, receiving some information. You would probably notice that the briefing in the foreign ministry for ambassadors of various countries, we haven't seen ambassador of Great Britain there. If Britain has questions in this case, why shouldn't British ambassador come and listen the answers? So, as if they're asking questions, not willing to get any answers, as if they ask questions, having a judgment priorly to that. So this is extremely unfair. This is extremely contradictory with international law, international principles of behavior and diplomacy. So this is unwillingness to see the reality. To see the reality, I mean the absence of chemical weapons in Russia. And it's not Russia's judgment, it's a judgment of international organization, relevant international organization. So this is it.
So I agree, it's unfair the way you put it, but what's Russia going to do? I mean, we're just going to, step back and not say anything, not explain anything, or we're just going to leave the ball into the British court?
No one should expect Russia to cede and keep silence against such a craziness, against such an aggressiveness and unpredictability. Of course, Russia will pursue its goals. Russia will defend its interests, and Russia will answer every step of entire Russian origin, and Russia will definitely continue to explain itself. It is doing every day. You see all the discussions, all the explanations coming from Russia's responsible ministries. Well, everything that can be said, as a theory, is improper. I'm not a politologist. I'm not a journalist to throw any theories, any models of incident. We have to be very responsible against this incident. This is really very dangerous for all of us. Usage of an agent, of nerve agent, in Europe. This is a danger for all of us. This was attempt of killing of Russian citizen. By the way, I don't know if Mr. Skripal still has a Russian citizenship, but his daughter definitely has. So, and Russia is a country, of course, it needs to receive information about state of health of its citizen that was assassinated on British soil. This is completely unfair to mention about any slightest possibility of Russia's being involved in that.
We're going to take a short break right now. When we come back, we'll continue talking to Russian President's Press Secretary Dmitry Peskov. Stay tuned. And we're back. You're watching Sophie & Co. and we're talking to Russian President's Press Secretary Dmitry Peskov. I want to talk to you shortly about Trump and Putin relationship, because I know that the two men don't have hostilities on the personal level. Trump has said many times that he actually likes Putin and he would like to mend ties with Russia, but every time he tries to do something, there is such an outrage, whether it's from Congress or from the media, that it seems almost impossible. So does it mean that no matter who the United States president is, there will be no detente between Washington and Moscow?
Well, we hope for the better. And besides, there is a very strong necessity in maintaining dialogue between Washington and Moscow. When we have severe conflicts like in Syria, like Korean Peninsula, in various other regions of the world, it needs Russian-American cooperation. Unfortunately, we see that not all the bodies of power in the United States are of that opinion. And yes, we've heard lots of statements coming from American president saying that he would like to solve existing problems between us two through dialogue. That is totally supported by his Russian counterpart, Mr. Putin. But we know that some people in Congress, in Senate, they are of different opinion. I do not know to what extent balance of powers in the United States, and it's not our business. We cannot interfere in those affairs, and we don't have a slightest wish to interfere in that situation. To what extent that balance of power can affect the future of our relationship, but we still consider the most important statements by the President of the United States. And we do hope that there will be a chance for President Putin and President Trump to sit down together sooner or later and to discuss existing problems. We know that President Trump has made a phone call to President Putin. He congratulated him despite what was written in various newspapers.
Despite Congress' opposition to call and congratulate?
So he called him and they have reached an understanding that they have to come together, and they decided to instruct their Foreign Minister Lavrov and
Mike Pompeo, what do you think of his appointment, him replacing Tillerson? I know you've said that you can't possibly go below ground zero, so do you think that things could get better with Mike Pompeo at the helm of the State Department?
Well, we know that he's a very experienced person.
He's a tough guy.
He's a tough guy. He's an experienced person in international affairs. He knows international affairs from a different angle, not from the angle of diplomacy. It's important to work with all the counterparts. Sometimes you can find common grounds for discussions with quite unexpected people. Do
you know your counterpart in the White House? I mean, you've been with Putin for 10 years and before, right?
Yeah.
And before that, you worked in the presidential pool even more than 10 years or something like that. I mean, Obama changed his secretary, I think, 4 times. Trump in 1 year, 4 times or 2 times. Bush 5 times. I don't know what kind of longevity potion you're taking, but do you know your counterpart in America?
Well, yes. Unfortunately, our presidents are not meeting frequently, so that's why we don't have a reason to contact each other frequently. But when they have meetings, and they had 2 meetings, in Germany, and also there were some contacts in Vietnam, we had some contacts with my counterpart. So not detailed, but at least we know each other. Yeah.
So you mentioned it in the beginning of the interview, and everyone noticed how Putin and with the interview at Megyn Kelly said about you sometime. So you, as you put it, say. Did you take it seriously, or was it like a joke? Were you like, whoa, where did that come from?
Well, every joke of the president carries a very important, very deep understanding. Well, this is well, if president criticizing you, even half seriously, half joke, you have to take it into account.
But
well, you know, every press secretary in this world, is being criticized sometimes by his boss.
Okay, well, but
it's unavoidable.
Jokes put aside, there is something that I want to talk to you about. For instance, I know, like, when I listen to Putin and he jokes, it's funny. I mean, at least in Russian language, it is really funny. And when he says witty stuff, it's funny. And I remember the panel with Megyn Pally when, you know, he was very tough and, you know, we're thinking it was so cool. And then when it was, and then it was translated into English, and it just didn't make any sense. I mean, the jokes didn't make any sense, and his wittiness didn't make any sense. And I just realized that everything that he says that we think is so cool is completely lost in translation when it's translated into different languages. I mean, that mentality gap, that even further widens it, I feel.
No, we're different, you know. Well, President Putin is Russian. He's Russian, and he's making his jokes as Russian. And when they're not interpreted correctly, it's rather a problem of misinterpretation. And then, well, sometimes, yes, we feel different cultures. Sometimes we cannot understand jokes coming from outside, and the same thing happens.
Oh yeah, when we translate like senators' jokes or presidents' jokes, it doesn't make any sense in Russian either. It sounds super cynical.
Well, it's you know, it's national specialities, I would think, specialities, and it's rather our handicap in explaining our own president. I consider it to be our mishandling of information.
So do you think something should be done?
So we have to be more careful. We have to be more creative in explaining those jokes.
Yeah, because that, I mean, I feel like that drives the gap between the mentalities even further. Because you're like, oh, wow, what is he talking about?
Well, you know, it's like British sense of humor. Sometimes it's very hard to understand.
So tell me something. You've been with the president for a long time. I mean, it's only human that in 18 years, either you get tired, or you get annoyed, or you get angry, and you're like, I want to leave. Did you ever feel like he was close to being like, I want to go? I can't do this anymore?
Well, you see, if you want to go, and if you continue to work, first of all, it's unfair towards your boss. And you have to be fair. And if you work with an outstanding person like Putin,
I asked about Putin, not you.
No, well,
did you ever feel he wanted to? Did you ever feel like he ever wanted to leave? He doesn't have a boss.
You mean Putin?
Yes, He doesn't have a boss.
No, I don't think so. He's got a huge understanding of what to do to make this country better. And he sees better than everyone in this country the scope of the problems. He knows the problems of different regions. He knows the problems of people working in different spheres of economy, of civil servants. He knows ecological problems. He knows problems of production, problems of healthcare, of social insurance, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, he understands what can be the way of solving this problem. And I can feel it working next to him, that it's a huge drive for himself. It's a huge drive for himself combined with sense of responsibility.
And that's why you never wanted to leave him.
This is a great chance for our country. This is a great chance for our country, and a great chance and a great challenge for himself.
That's why you never wanted to leave him, because that was going to be my second question.
It's unbelievable experience. It's unbelievable, unprecedented experience, and I can hardly imagine any other positioning in this world that brings such an experience to you.
I'm just going to ask you a last question about Twitter. I know that you and Putin and mostly all of Russia's government, with the exception of Medvedev, aren't very tech pro. I mean, you're very conservative guys.
Yeah.
But this Twitter thing and the whole social media thing is really changing the paradigm of how politics works and how diplomacy works and how media works.
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
And I mean, we were all smiling or laughing at Trump tweeting until, you know, he's meeting with the North Korean leader, and you know, maybe it's fair to say that Twitter did its fair share in the meeting. So it's really changing the whole construction of how politics and diplomacy works. Are you guys not considering going on Twitter or going into social media?
Well, I think that among all the tasks of technological breakthrough of this country, there should be also a task of a broader usage of social media.
I'll take it as a
in
yes.
explaining state affairs number one, to our own citizens, and number two, to the world.
Dmitry Peskov, thank you very much for this interview. All the best of luck.
Thank you.